Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Poema podcast. I am James Prescott, your host. Welcome back to the show. It's good to have you all here again. And this week we have a returning guest. This will be a returning guest for long-time listeners because the last time they were on the show was in 2020, which, believe it or not, is over 3 years ago now. By the time this goes out, it'll probably be like 3.5, 4 years. Um, Welcome back to the podcast, Shari A Smith.
Thank you. So glad to be back. It's hard to believe that it's been 3 years.
I know. I know. We follow each other on Twitter, so we interact a lot anyway.
Yeah,
But it just, yeah, like I think we were just saying before we started recording how time passes so strangely now. It's like since the pandemic,
yeah,
time's just gone all strange.
yeah, yeah. There's
um,
no making sense of it.
no, like because it can seem like that was like 5, 10 years ago, but also it seems like 5 minutes ago. So um, yeah, but yeah, it's good to have you back on the show.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be back. I feel like last time we had such a great conversation. I think it was like an hour long, but it felt like it was 5 minutes, right?
Yep,
So
I remember.
that's
Yeah,
always the mark of a great conversation.
absolutely. Yeah, and you're now doing. You've got a podcast of your own now.
I do. It's called Survivors Discuss, and it's actually three of us. It's Kate West, Claire Heath McIver, who also goes by Kit Kennedy, and we try to give a voice to survivors of trauma, specifically religious trauma.
Mm,
So we do a lot of conversation about what it's like to grow up in purity culture, for instance, or we have an episode about to drop about what it's like to be a BIPOC person in an evangelical setting, and how that sort of being in that sort of white supremacist culture can create a lot of trauma for a lot of people. So I think that's going to be a very powerful one.
yeah, and that's such an important podcast. Things like giving voices to survivors and letting them tell their story. I mean, I've let a lot of people tell their story on this show, and I know how powerful it's been for them. The feedback I've got afterwards, because some of them have been sharing their story for the first time.
Yeah.
In fact, some of them I didn't know it was the first time they were sharing their story.
Mm,
And that's probably a good thing actually, because if you know it's the first time, there's an extra weight.
yeah.
But it must be, yeah. I mean, for them, it must be powerful for them as well as for you.
Oh yeah, for sure. We've only done a few episodes so far, but just being able to witness people owning their voice, owning their stories, and saying, "Hey, this happened. I survived this." Like that feels like such a privilege to be invited into that. Um, and it's not something I take lightly. I know I've survived a lot of trauma and abuse, and I know what it costs to be able to tell your own story, and that is not easy. So if anybody has the courage to do that, I am just their biggest fan.
Mm, yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah, absolutely. And it is. I feel the same when I
Yeah.
have people share their stories on here. It's a privilege to be able to sit with people as they do that and bear witness to
Mhm.
that. You know, and
Yeah.
because it takes so much courage um, when you've been through what lots of people have been through, and you
Yeah, and for many of them, telling their story, that means that they also lose their community too. Like once you start to own your truth, there's a lot of people that will not be okay with that. So there's just all of these levels of cost to being open and honest with your story.
yes, absolutely, yeah, uh, absolutely, and that's a yeah, that's what makes it such a courageous act, and I mean, I've experienced that to a certain extent myself. I mean, I talk about my story a lot on social media and on my podcast. Um, and I've lost friends, and
Yeah.
it's hard, especially because at the time I was single, and then not to have community. suddenly.
Yeah.
It's hard, and
Oh,
then
for sure. And we're social creatures. We need our social safety nets. We need people to sit with us and say, what you've experienced is real. Um, and the feelings that you feel as a result of this, they are valid. Like everybody needs that. And so I'm sorry that you've been in that place where you just did not get what you needed.
yeah, I'm fortunate in that I've found healthy community
Well, that's great.
elsewhere. Like I'm part of this online Mighty Networks community, which is kind of we've created together the people that are there, and it's got a little bit smaller, but for good reasons. Some
Yeah.
people got what they needed from it and found other community in person,
Yeah.
and there's some of us that are still there, and it's so healthy because there's no leadership structure, as it were. There's no
Yeah.
hierarchy. It's just we co-create it. There is structure. There is obviously there are facilitators and things like that, and there are boundaries and things that we all have to adhere to. But like, there's no hierarchy at all. It's not. There's no power structure.
Oh, that's great.
It's um, it's I've never seen anything like it, and it's such a safe space for me and for the other people that are there as well, and
Oh, that's
we
great.
make that together. So it's yeah.
Sounds kind of revolutionary.
Yeah, and it started around September, around the time we talked. Actually, September
Oh,
2020. That was
nice.
that was when it kind of started, and yeah, and it's just evolved and it's really organically changed. And we did an in person meetup as well once kind of the worst of the pandemic was over, and we were there wasn't any mask mandates anymore. We obviously we all got made sure we were vaccinated and we masked up when we in certain with certain boundaries, but so it was safe. But we've been able to meet up last year, which was amazing. Yeah,
Oh, that's great. I love
yeah,
that.
yeah. So, and that's yeah, and there's more of those kind of communities springing up. I think,
Yeah.
like, and I think like part of deconstruction is deconstructing how we do community as well, like, and changing how we do community. Um,
Absolutely. I think a lot of us, um, we came out of particularly religious institutions where we were kind of given a model for how community is supposed to go. Like you had your small groups, you had the person leading the small groups, you had the people above the person leading the small groups. Like it just kind of keeps going up and up until you have the ultimate authority, and that creates so many issues. And I mean, I suppose that there are ways that you could have a structure like that in which it is healthy, but I think in a lot of cases, it just creates a lot of you must conform to our group expectations. And if you don't, then you're out. And that can be really like if you're the receiver of this message, like that is painful, right? And so you're not going to want to be kicked out, so you're just going to keep bending yourself to conform to what they want. um, and yeah, it's often not a healthy thing. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I've seen it firsthand the harm that toxic community structures can do, and like one of the things I learned by studying spiral dynamics, which is like the healthy structure is like the blue phase, but what I realized through studying that was that what happened is that the structure became the thing rather than the values. Rather than being a place of safety and love and compassion and kindness and trying to live out those values, it became and building a structure to support those values
yeah,
rather than it became we need to protect the structure, not the values. And that's an easy mistake to fall into. I've got to say, to be honest. You can start with the best of intentions and you know, end up worshipping the structure rather than the values. And that's what happened kind of with the evangelical church.
yeah,
Maybe it started with good intentions, but and it ended up becoming the kind of the structure became the idol, like, in a way.
Yeah, for sure. And I think in a lot of cases, I do know that there are healthy evangelical churches. I've seen them, I've experienced them.
Oh wow.
Um, but I think as an overall institution, I think there is a huge issue of conflating God with the subculture of evangelicalism. So if you have a doctrinal disagreement with the subculture, like let's say saving sex for marriage is a pretty foundational belief of evangelicalism.
Hmm.
But if you say, well, actually, the Bible doesn't talk about this except for only women are expected to do that, not men, then suddenly you're going against the culture. And by going against the culture, you are being labeled as rebellious against God.
Mm.
Um, so we have a lot of that going on, which creates
Yeah,
very unhealthy dynamics between church leaders and congregants.
yeah, very much so. Yeah, and that's what can lead to these controlling environments,
Yeah.
um, controlled by white males generally,
Yes.
unfortunately, and we've seen a lot of the stories that have come out,
Yeah.
which is really really sad. It upsets me every time I see one of the stories. I can't read all of them because it's too traumatic to read all
Oh,
of
it's
them.
devastating. I just finished reading a book a few months ago. I think it was called The Bible Told Them So, and it was about how
Yeah.
evangelicalism, when segregation became outlawed, evangelicals started looking to the Bible to pull out justifications for why black people and white people needed to be in separate churches, because the black people are obviously a different subset of human from the white people, and the Bible is telling us this, right? So like there's a very dominant white supremacist culture within evangelicalism, and I think a lot of uh, well-intentioned evangelicals just aren't aware of this, and they are not aware of how they are perpetuating these issues as well.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, I mean that's true. I think one of the things that I've learned is there are well-meaning people on all sides, as
Yeah.
it were. Like, I don't like using the word sides really, but there are well-meaning evangelical Christians. There are well-meaning um, people on all sides, but all sides can cause harm as well if you're not careful. And uh, that's a difficult. I mean, that's the nuance, isn't it? And we
Yeah.
talked, like, privately. We talked about how nuance is important, and um, that's the thing. That's to me. That's a when I can see somebody understands nuance, then they become a really safe person for me,
Hmm.
because when someone understands that, then you can have a healthy conversation with them,
Yeah.
and you can have healthy accountability with them because they understand what you're talking about, and they know that you're not going to shame them or judge them if you kind of hold them accountable. Like, I mean, I've got friends who've held me accountable, but they've done it in a way which is completely loving and has actually strengthened our friendship rather than the other way around.
That's great. I mean, that's what you want, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, the black and white thinking where it's either all yes or all no. Um, you can't have conversation in that situation, because if you're not on the right side, you are anathema essentially.
Mm,
Um, and if you start to see people as us versus them, you can only see the other side as your enemy. How are you ever going to bridge that gap?
yeah, that's right. And yeah, absolutely. And I've always said that yeah. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, like, I don't want to say in the olden days, but certainly like post-war until probably the 90s, in politics, there was a lot of um, cooperation on all sides. There was this kind of consensus, even if they disagreed on specific things, they would also be willing to work together because they both wanted to achieve a common goal, in a sense. and they would find ways to work together, and they would not be beholden to their tribe, as it were. I don't use that word tribe, to their to their to their
They're
community,
collective.
the
Yeah.
collective. Yeah, I forget I used that word. That's not appropriate. But so yeah, to their collective, and that's kind of gone now.
Yeah.
It's become very kind of divisive, and like people are very like staying in their place and
Yeah.
not moving and not compromising, and that's one of the things that's wrong with the world right now.
Yeah.
But because I think and I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think that the reason that people were so willing to work together was because a lot of those people had lived through the war
Mhm.
or were born straight after the war, and so
Yeah.
there was this kind of like understanding of like we can't allow this to happen again.
Yeah.
We can't allow this much death, this much suffering, this much division and hatred to happen again, and we need to be able to work together for the good of humankind.
Yeah.
Uh, and they understood that because they'd experienced it, and we've kind of lost that. I think I can't remember who said it. I can't remember who said it. I think it was on a politics podcast or something. But like that generation, I think it was John Major actually, who was a former British Prime Minister, um, who was very much a consensus person, like kind of brought people together. But he said there's a whole generation of people that had died, that also had left politics at the end in the 90s, and the generation after them had not experienced
Yeah.
the Second World War, and so they had a different approach. And he said that there's been a notable change in politics since then, and he's right.
Yeah.
And in culture generally, I think there's a we're getting on to we're getting on to 80 years since the Second World War ended.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, and you always say that we should. I think the biggest lesson is that humans don't learn from their mistakes, unfortunately.
Well, yeah, and then I think the other issue is like, I mean, the old saying is, if you don't know your history, you will be doomed to repeat it. And I think we're kind of seeing that a little bit right now, where I mean, let's say like the 9/11, you and I experienced that firsthand.
Absolutely.
But there's a lot of kids, even adults now, that they didn't experience that. They don't know what that's like. Um, and so I think that can lead to a lot of assumptions about how the world works because um, I'm not sure where I'm going with this. Um, do you see what I'm saying?
I do. I do.
Yeah,
I absolutely do. Yeah. People. I mean, like, yeah. If you're born in 2000, you'd be 23.
yeah,
You're an adult.
yeah,
So and you won't remember 9/11. I watched it on TV. I saw the whole thing from start to finish,
yeah.
and I didn't realize how much that traumatized me at the time.
Oh, yeah,
I didn't realize at all, but I eventually had to do some therapy around it because it was
yeah.
like, oh, that actually had an effect on me.
It was a traumatic thing. Even like you and I are not Americans, but we still saw the footage. We still had this sense of safety taken away from us. Like, if this can happen in the US, it can happen anywhere, right? And so,
So,
like, I certainly experienced that as traumatic as well.
I
Like,
mean,
there are,
we were attacked. We were attacked in London 7 years later.
that's true. Yeah.
I was actually in London the day that it happened.
Oh, wow.
I was in because I worked in central London.
Oh,
Luckily,
wow.
I didn't get the tube to work. I got the train to work, and I don't think there was any chance I would have been on the tube that got blown up. But like, you know, um, but that was really close to home. Like, that was where in the city I worked in. And so yeah, you kind of feel it. And it's yeah, these things affect you. They affect how you see things, and they give you more patience and understanding. For
Yeah.
things, I think. And yeah, well, where did we come here from? This is
I have no idea.
I love it. I love it. I love this. Is why I love conversations, like, because without any kind of like formal agenda, because you just can just
Yeah.
you can just explore and see where things go. That's the
Yeah, I love it. We can go down all the little rabbit holes.
Yeah, and this started with just talking about your podcast and people sharing their stories.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, like, so like just gravitating back to that. How has doing that podcast and hearing those stories on a kind of regular basis affected you?
Well, like I said, we've only done a few episodes. We've done 5 now, but I feel like every time we do an interview, so the way it's set up is we have a panel discussion for each topic. So we'll bring in 2 or 3 guests, and so you can hear differing perspectives even within one conversation, which is amazing. One of the episodes we released was about purity culture and trauma that we carry in our bodies. And we had Tara Tang, who is a somatics worker who specializes in purity culture. And we had Rebecca Lindenbach, who is Sheila Gregoire's daughter and works on fair marriage. So she has all of the statistics and the studies. And so it was a really interesting conversation to kind of, all of us were sharing our experiences with purity culture and how that impacted our bodies, our lives, our mental health. Um, but then you could have Tara talking about how to move trauma through your body, and then Rebecca would jump in and say, "Here's what the studies show us about how this culture has impacted not just men and not just women, but men and kids too." So I feel like I learn so much with each episode. Like I go into the episode with my own experiences, my own studies, but then they always bring something new that just kind of blows my mind. It's amazing.
Wow, yeah, that's powerful, and that's good to like to hold space for those kind of conversations between
Hmm.
different people with different perspectives is a
Yeah,
real special thing,
yeah,
and something we don't do enough of. I think it's again, it's kind of that nuancy thing, like where you're kind of willing to just listen and engage and learn from each other and understand, at least understand each other, even if you have different perspectives and different backgrounds.
yeah.
Well, maybe you can learn from each other, and yeah, that's what we need more of.
Yeah, for sure. And, even so, the next episode that's about to drop, we have Latoya Thompson, Naomi Gonzalez, and Scott Okamoto. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Um, and they haven't necessarily. I think Scott has done a lot of research. Latoya as well. Um, but really, the conversation is mostly just about this is what I've experienced. Speaking for them, this is what they've each individually experienced as people of color, and how that's impacted their faith in their lives. And as a white woman, to just sit in the room and listen to them share their stories, it's just, I knew going into it that white supremacy is kind of baked into evangelicalism, but to hear them share their stories and to sit with them as they're sharing their stories, it brings a whole new level of, oh my god, this culture is just so toxic. And um it, maybe we can change it, but it's going to take a lot of work, and a lot of white people really need to wake up really fast for it to work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that is yeah, and we see that a lot. I see that a lot more on social media than I used to. I think Twitter with a certain person buying it and changing it has, and people leaving as well. A lot of people leaving has left more space for those kind of voices to perpetuate, and and more freedom for them to do whatever they want to do,
Yeah,
and not face consequences, which is awful. Um, but I've seen some things on there from kind of white supremacists or like hardline evangelicals. Like it's just like people actually believe this stuff. Like I
yeah,
was, you know, and it's scary. I just like
yeah.
like maybe I mean I'm kind of I suppose I'm an idealist, but it just baffles me is how people can never be convinced that that's even remotely compassionate or kind or just. Like I just yeah, I'm always kind of yeah, baffled. I'm baffled, but also I get it. I get how when you're white, because I'm white, that when people play to your ego and make you out like you're the best, and that's a very comforting thought, isn't it? Like it can be, it's
Mhm.
very tempting, it's very seductive,
Yeah.
and if you're an insecure person anyway, um, yeah, that's
Yeah.
kind of, and that goes back to the whole not processing grief and trauma. Like
Yeah.
you haven't dealt with your insecurities, you haven't dealt with
Yeah.
what the trauma you went through, you haven't been processed the grief that you've got and you're carrying. Like,
Yeah.
and if you did all of those things and had a better connection to yourself, you wouldn't need to justify yourself with
Yeah.
white supremacist philosophy. Like,
Well,
uh,
and
yeah,
it's interesting because so we used to talk about this a lot when I wrote for Asia Rising a few years ago. And one of the most common things that we would see is when we would try to bring up, hey, white people, let's deal with our blindness in this area. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. We have not approached the topic of race or racial justice in appropriately. We have a lot of unlearning that we need to do in ourselves. And we would get a ton of people pushing back on that, just um, angry that they're being asked to do this work, or angry at the insinuation that they could have any racist bone in their bodies. And I think a lot of it comes down to in evangelicalism, if you say that you have done something wrong, it means that you have sinned. And if you're a sinner, you are just completely broken inside. So when you're calling out someone for the white supremacy, you are basically saying they are the worst of the worst. They deserve to burn in hell. So I think there's a lot of um, resilience or a lack of resilience there. Um,
mm,
Being asked to reckon with this thing that if you live in if you're living in the U.S., Canada, probably Britain as well, the system is set up for white people, um,
yeah,
and that's something that we have to acknowledge. That it doesn't mean that you or I are scum who deserves to burn in hell. It just means we got to acknowledge that there's a problem here, and what can we do to stop perpetuating that in our own lives, our families, our communities, our churches, everything.
exactly right. That's absolutely right. And yeah, um, yeah, you have to recognize as a white person that we are living systems that are created by white people to benefit white people, and that is kind of institutional racism. That is
Yeah.
systemic racism. That's what it is. Um, and so many people still don't understand this, and it's like we need to be teaching that in schools. We need to be teaching
Yeah.
that in schools
Yeah.
from a young age. Like, and that's the only way to me, that's the only way you can really change a culture anyway. You have to educate people from youth to understand
Yeah.
all these things, because then when
Yeah.
they become adults, they'll understand them intuitively, and then if everyone understands them intuitively, then the culture will change, and things will change. That's the only way but that takes decades to do because you've got to wait for these people to grow up.
Well, and in the US too, we have entire states that are just banning books or banning classes in elementary schools to teach about, slavery or
Mm,
like why do we need the civil rights laws? Like there's an active movement to push against trying to address white supremacy within the culture at large. And it's ridiculous. It's disgusting. Um, but I think that's another area too, where like we have to, as white people, we have to acknowledge that this is a problem and we can't just sit by and just let it be.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And I read something today which really troubled me. I'm just trying to find it. That they about I'm trying to find it now. Like it's just yeah, the city in Tennessee has banned being gay in public.
Oh, I
Um,
hadn't heard that one.
that kind of broke today, and the day that we're recording, and the law is also the law that's being used to do that is also being used to ban books, and it's
Of
like
course.
this is 2023 in
Yeah,
in America.
it's ridiculous.
Like what is going on? And it's just terrifying. You're going back to the dark ages, or
Yeah,
and it's just like this is 2023.
yeah.
How can we be doing this to human beings and human bodies in 2023? It's
Yeah, it's absolutely disgusting. And I can't even like, I mean, I'm a straight white woman, but I cannot imagine being placed in a situation where I have to deny some aspect of my humanity because the law says that there's something wrong with me. Like, um, I don't know if it's okay to swear in here, but that is fucked up.
oh, it's okay to swear here.
Okay. That's the
Yeah,
only term I can think of to describe that sort of law.
yeah. Oh, it's absolutely yeah. I agree completely, and yeah, it makes me angry. And
Yeah,
I can't do anything about it, which makes me angry as well. Like
yeah,
I think there's a lot of people who feel powerless about um, some things that are going on in their own countries and in other countries, and powerlessness can lead to if you're not in a healthy place, powerlessness can lead to doing things that you regret and causing harm. Again, it's about being healthy emotionally and like having a place to process that powerlessness. Like um, I'm very fortunate that I have a good therapist, and I can I see them every 2 weeks, and I talk to them about. That's one of the things. If I'm feeling powerless about something, I talk to them about it, and just talking about it is helpful. Because then you don't take that out on somebody else and cause harm. And that's why I always say to people that people should, if they can get some kind of affordable therapy, they should, because
yeah,
I know not everyone can afford it. I know that like I'm very lucky in that I have support to get it, because I can't really afford it myself. And yeah, but if you can, you should.
yeah,
Like I think therapy
yeah.
should be available for everyone,
Oh,
regardless
yeah,
of
for
income. Like
sure.
I mean, it's ridiculous that it shouldn't be a privilege. It shouldn't be a privilege of the rich to get therapy. It
Yeah.
shouldn't. We
Yeah,
just
I tell people that my love language is saying, "Go find a therapist if you can afford it." I really do think that everyone, regardless of if you're going through a crisis or struggling with mental health, or you just think you're fine, you will find benefit through therapy if you're able to access that. And I mean, that's the key, if you're able to access that, because, like you say,
yeah,
it's not necessarily a given.
yeah. I mean, we have some therapy on the NHS here in the UK,
Mm.
but it's limited. It's only a number. You only get a limited number of sessions,
Oh,
and it depends on your circumstances as well.
yeah,
But at least it's something. And I think if we get a change of government, that might be expanded, so more people get access to it, and it'd be more prioritised, which is good. Some workplaces now here offer it free of
okay,
charge, which is good. So it's getting better here, and obviously we have our NHS, which is godsend, because we get all our healthcare free. But
yeah.
I think they want to make progressive parties want to make mental health as important as physical health, which is good.
Oh, yeah, that's
And
important.
so hopefully that will happen here, and that will. I mean, if more people got therapy, I think that, like our countries would be in a better place.
Yeah,
If everyone who needed therapy was getting therapy,
yeah,
um, yeah, I think it would in the world. The
Yeah.
world would be better if everyone got therapy.
Oh,
And
I totally agree.
we need more therapists. We need more people to train as
Yeah,
therapists.
yeah,
We need to pay them well because they should be paid well because they do an important job. But we
yeah.
need more of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I distinctly remember, because the way that I grew up, therapy was always just um, it wasn't looked upon very positively. Like there was always like an air of suspicion where if you go to therapy, then they're going to turn you against your parents, so don't do it. Um, or they'll
Yeah, I
give
remember
you
that. Yeah.
false memories or some like ridiculous things like that. But I just remember when I finally gave myself permission to go see a therapist, and I was lucky that the first one I went to go see, she turned out to be a great fit for me. So, but I remember having this distinct moment sitting in a session, talking to her, and thinking to myself, this is the first time I've ever felt like I've been ministered to. Like I grew up in the church, I grew up in evangelicalism, and I've never had that feeling until I found therapy. And then
Mm,
suddenly it was just, I'm accepted here. I'm my experiences, my feelings, everything about me is welcome in this room. And I don't think I'd ever experienced that in church.
mm, yeah. Yeah. I know. What happened with me is I found a spiritual director first, but my spiritual director was a qualified therapist.
Oh.
So when I was getting spiritual direction, I was also it was like getting spiritual therapy because it was therapy and spiritual direction at the same time
Oh, that
under
sounds great.
under the guise of spiritual direction.
Yeah.
um, and uh, and then I actually found a proper therapist around like 3 or 4 years ago, and started doing IFS therapy, internal family systems therapy, which I
Yeah.
recommend to everyone because it's
It's great.
unbelievable.
Yeah.
And I've done talk therapy, and I've done, so all of those things, like and I found embodiment coaching as well, alongside internal family systems therapy, was really
Oh, that's great.
important. Like naming my body as a person and giving him
Yeah.
a gender and talking to him as a him,
Yeah.
and then doing IFS at the same time was like absolutely transformative.
Oh, I can imagine.
Like now I have a relationship with my body, and I communicate with my body, and he communicates with me. I mean, it's really healthy, really good for my physical health, my mental health, because I'm more aware of what's happening in my body,
Yeah.
and that includes trauma responses,
Yeah.
and physical health. So I recommend that. I mean, obviously, that's what worked for me. It wouldn't work for everyone.
Right.
And that's the whole point: is that you find something that really works for you, and then you lean
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah.
Other people find other things work for them that don't work for me, and that's totally fine. We're all One of the things that people have to remember is that we're all on our own journeys, and there are journeys, and we shouldn't compare ourselves with others. We should just have our own journeys,
Yeah.
and give ourselves permission to have those. It's not about conformity because
Right.
we're not all the same.
Well, it's like deconstruction, right? Like some people, they deconstruct and they deconstruct out of faith, whereas other people deconstruct and they find a way to reconstruct their faith again into something healthier. So even
Yeah,
like that, there's no one size fits all solution there. You have to figure out what works for you, your life, your mental health, your body, all of it.
absolutely, 100%. And yeah, but that's why I'm always happy to hear other people's stories, even if they're different to mine, because
Yeah.
it the point is, are you in a healthier place emotionally and physically? Like, have you processed your trauma? Have you processed your grief? Have you done that work? Are you doing that work still? Or have you like unlearned a lot of things like white supremacy and all that kind of thing? Have you If you've done all of that, then you're whatever your journey looks like, wherever you are, you'll be healthy, and
Yeah.
you can tell a healthy person by their behavior
Yeah.
as well. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
you wouldn't shouldn't need to tell anyone that you're in a healthy place because it should just come across.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
And if you're in a healthy place, you can usually tell the people who aren't as well. So
Yes. It's really interesting actually. Like I grew up watching House. I used to watch that show all the time. It was
Oh,
a
I've
big
never
hit
seen
in my
this.
home. And then I stopped watching it. I went to therapy for a few years and then I decided to watch it again and suddenly like I'm just kind of looking at all of the characters and going, this is an incredibly dysfunctional group of people. Bunch of narcissists, bunch of codependent people, bunch of traumatized people who have not processed their trauma. And I did not see that in my first watch, which was interesting. But now that I have a different frame of reference, I can go, oh, that's not healthy.
Yeah, I have that. I have that with the shows that I've watched as
Yeah.
well. I've been rewatching Friends a lot recently because
Oh, yeah.
Matthew
Yeah.
Perry, and
Yeah.
yeah, and that having and obviously getting to know Matthew Perry a bit through his work, through his book and his his advocacy and everything. It's so interesting how Chandler is almost, and he says this in his book as well, but Chandler is basically him. They
Yeah.
wrote Chandler in it, but actually when he read the part, it's like, this is me. This is literally me. Um, and obviously that makes it harder to watch Chandler because when you see all his insecurities and things, you think, oh,
Yeah.
But you're right. And like, now I see those. Now I can see those characters through a different lens, like how dysfunctional they are, how many insecurities they've got,
Yeah.
where those insecurities are.
Yeah.
Um, and and like that's why it's so satisfying when you see a good character arc on a TV show. Like we've just finished watching Loki, which I said on my Instagram is one of the best character arcs I've ever seen anywhere.
Oh, I need to watch the new season.
Like it's the whole when you watch Loki from the first time you see him in the first Thor, and you watch the timeline, you watch the first Thor movie, watch Avengers, and then from Avengers go into the Loki show because that's the timeline of this Loki. Man, it's like
Yeah.
this guy deals with his grief, he deals with his trauma, he deals with his anger, he deals with everything, all his emotional stuff, and the transformation is incredible. It is he is a
Yeah.
different character by even by the end of the first season,
Yeah.
and it's just I've never seen it that so dramatically played out on a TV show before. But that is what can happen.
Yeah.
And it's such a dramatic like showing of like that a lot of anger and rage and hatred and ego and stuff is not character. It's just you've got all this stuff buried inside of you that you never dealt with. Because as soon as Loki starts dealing with it, he changes completely and he heals and he
Yeah.
becomes a hero. Like, and he starts making friends and he starts, loving people and people start loving him. And and season two is incredible. I like, you'll need a box of tissues for
Oh,
episode
okay.
six,
Well, I'll
but
consider myself warned.
I would highly recommend it to everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like that show is essentially the deconstruction of Loki. That is
Oh,
what
I love it.
what two series are about.
Yeah.
Like, and the kind of awakening as well, and the rebirth and like transformation of Loki, and it's quite emotional because when you think again, Loki's a character that we've all been watching for 13 years,
Yeah.
or whatever it was, whenever Thor came out, and that's a long time, and we kind of liked him. We kind of love to hate him to start with, and now now you kind of genuinely love him and empathize with him, and you want the best for him because he's just done the work on himself,
Yeah.
and yeah, to see the end, it's yeah. I'm not going to say what it is for your sake
Okay,
because
well,
most people that listen will probably have watched it, and I'll probably have done a podcast episode on it at some point as well. But it's yeah, it's just incredible. So and like we need more of those stories in the movies and on TV because that shows you what a healthy processing of grief and trauma can look
yeah.
like. And
Yeah.
like WandaVision
Oh my gosh.
was was the
Yes.
unhealthy processing of grief and trauma, like
Yes.
and what that can do and the harm that can do. So that's why I always love like exploring superheroes and grief. And there's a book on superhero grief written by a psychologist,
Oh, interesting.
which kind of explores lot of the MCU and Batman and Superman from a psychological perspective. Like
Oh,
and I had her on my podcast, the author. So
that
but
sounds fascinating because they all have these really tragic backstories, right?
yeah, most of them have lost someone. Most of them they lose a parent or or an uncle or a friend or somebody,
Yeah.
or they're taken away from their home, or they're adopted, or like something. There's some kind of trauma at the
Yeah.
beginning which drives them into becoming who they are. Like, um, yeah,
I'll have to look for that one. That sounds fascinating.
yeah. I think that book's on Amazon if anyone wants to buy it. I've got a copy of it. It's fantastic, and it's the kind of thing you can dip in and out of, because each of them is kind of a study in itself.
Okay.
So, and by proper like experts, qualified experts, who understand this stuff. So it's fascinating. Yeah,
Sounds
I
like
think
it.
more people need to read that book because I think it's that's one of the reasons I love superheroes. Honestly, is because of all
Yeah.
the psychological stuff and the yeah, and that I think that's why a lot of geeks and nerds are kind of people who are on the spectrum or have been through trauma, because you relate to these characters and they're kind of a they become your friends because they're like, well, they know what I feel like. And that,
Yeah, and then you can watch them go through their healing journey and go, okay, so this superhero, he's been where I've been and he's okay and he's even starting to thrive. Maybe that can be true for me too, right?
yeah, exactly right. Yeah, yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, I think yeah, they have those movies have such can have such power, you
Yeah.
know. Um, yeah, and yeah, I'm looking forward to the Superman movie as well because that's a different kind of arc.
Yeah.
It's like a character who has all these powers but is not violent and is not destructive and is not um, aggressive, but is hopeful and optimistic and believes in people and saves people, and tries to resolve conflict without violence and like in the world that we live in. And I think that's more relevant than ever. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
um, yeah, I always love going off on a tangent talking about superheroes. It's great, but it's all connected, isn't it? Like
Yeah.
the work that you do on your show and people sharing their stories of healing and transformation and what we just talked about with Loki, for example, is like it's all connected. And um because yeah, I mean shows like that are like people are essentially we get to see somebody else's story play out, and
Yeah.
that can help us share our story.
Yeah, and grief and trauma are universal themes, right? Like there's not a single person who has ever lived that has not experienced those two things. Um, it really depends on like, okay, so what are you going to do with these things? Are you going to try and push them down, to push these big feelings down and ignore them and just kind of white knuckle through life, or are you going to sit with this? Are you going to get help? Are you going to reach out for support and be vulnerable and transparent with your loved ones about what you need and what you're going through and maybe find a new way to live, right?
Mm, absolutely, yeah, yeah, and there's hope in that, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's always hope. I find that like these stories that I hear, and I think the ones that you share, there's always a sense of hope at the end of them.
Because we're not stuck.
Yeah, that's right. When
And I
you're
think trauma can sometimes lie to us and make us feel like we are stuck. Whatever comes our way, then that's what life is. We can't do anything to change it. But the truth is, we actually do have choices. We can choose something different for ourselves. It might mean a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of energy, but none of us are truly stuck.
mm, absolutely, yeah, yeah, I love that, and yeah, wow, this has been great.
I always love talking with you, James.
We need to do more episodes together.
Yes.
I think there's more we can talk about.
Oh, absolutely.
I think there's a lot of grief stuff we could probably talk about.
Yeah.
And I love talking about that. Yeah, it's always great to talk about things with
Yeah.
people. And yeah, I'm a big fan of you and your work and everything that you're doing. So thank you for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's enjoyable.
Yeah, and where can people connect with you and your podcast and things?
Yeah, so if you want to follow me, you can go to my website, which is Shari A Smith, all one word.com. And you can find all my socials there. For the podcast, just go to Survivors Discuss, again, all one word.com. And you'll find our socials, you'll find our episodes, you'll find some blog posts, and you'll be able to follow all three hosts through that. So,
Fantastic, fantastic, and do give all those things a follow. I highly recommend it. So, yeah, thank you for coming on the show again, and I'm sure we'll see you again. Hopefully, not 3 years this time.
yeah, let's not wait so long.
And yeah, and thanks for listening, everybody.